I thought we had done that.
Awesome.
And give Talysa permission there. Looks like things are happening. Look at us. We are professionals.
So I'll just give a quick introduction of what I know about Tara. So as she's doing this, I've had the opportunity of working with Tara both as in the writing I've done as an editor and in leadership.
Tara or Talysa?
Talysa.
Talysa. Did I say Tara?
I'm afraid you did.
Yes.
But okay, we forgive you. Well,
I should just mute myself and go away. So anyway, Talysa last year or this year won an award that she showed us before the meeting started for Editor of the Year at a National Editors Conference. And if I'm remember correctly, this is a presentation that you gave to a standing room only at that conference. So
I didn't give this one at the conference.
oh, okay.
I gave 3 others at the conference,
Okay.
which were amazing. But this one I'm debuting for you.
All right. So this is we're the first people to get to see this. So we're going to open it up to Talysa Sainz and have her share with us her great expertise about sentences. Take it away.
Okay, Danielle, I'm gonna have you monitor the chat so that if there's a question, you can tell me so that I don't have to constantly be looking at it.
You got it.
So this is, I love sentences. I love sentence structure. It's my favorite thing. In college, I got a degree in English linguistics and language with minors in editing and general linguistics. And my favorite thing to study in all of college was sentence structure. So right now I work as a freelance editor, and I specialize in line editing, which has to do with sentence level structure and corrections. So this is very surface level, but you will see me geek out about it quite a bit. And I can go as deep into any of the topics as you guys want. And I'll probably go on way too long, so you'll have to stop me. But I'll try to keep it going. I'll try not to stop and geek out too much about any one thing. So, oh, where is it? Come on, there we go. Here's a few things that we are going to be, I will say quite a lot, so I want to make sure you guys know what these are. A sentence is a complete idea. So can someone tell me the difference between a clause and a sentence?
A clause does not have a subject and a verb.
Wrong. A clause
What?
has a subject and a verb.
But I have no idea. Talysa, tell us, what's the difference?
So a sentence can be made up of more than one clause. So a clause is what you are taught in school as being a complete sentence. It has a subject, it has a verb phrase, and it stands on its own. So that is a clause. A sentence can be made up of more than one clause, either dependent or independent. And I will show you that in the next slide. First, when I talk about subject, I'm sure everyone knows what that means, but I'm going to be talking about like the original noun phrase. So every subject is synonymous with the first noun phrase of a sentence. And so that includes things like the articles before the main subject noun, and any positive phrases, any prepositional phrases, and anything that has to do with the subject is in that original noun phrase. So a verb phrase is the predicate. That is the main verb of the clause and everything that goes along with it. So like any other adverbs or adjectives or anything that goes after it. And I will show you examples. So this is just so that if you have a question about any of these phrases during the presentation, let me know, and I will stop and go over it with examples. So these are sentence structures, 4 simple sentence structures. Well, not simple because one of them is actually simple, but 4 basic sentence structures. Simple is just one independent clause. Compound is 2 or more independent clauses. Complex is 1 independent clause and 1 dependent clause. So that's like when you have a clause that doesn't stand on its own. like when the author had writer's block, you can't say that by itself. You have to adjoin it to another independent clause. And then a compound complex is just a mixture of compound and complex. It's two or more independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses. So does that make sense so far for everyone? Does that answer what a sentence is? Okay, good. So a sentence is just at least one independent clause. And a clause is a subject and a verb. So types of, people say these are types of sentences, but I say they are wrong. They are types of clauses, because you can have sentences that have all these different types of clauses in the sentence. So declarative is just saying a statement. I am working on a novel. Interrogative is a question. Will I ever finish this draft? Structurally, when you're diagramming a sentence, this is the exact same as saying, I will ever finish this draft. So you would diagram the sentence the same way. You would just invert the subject and the modal verb, will, right there. And that's how you get the question. Exclamatory, those are, yay, exclamations, interjections, yay, I finished my book. Short exclamatory sentences can be just interjections. Longer ones, like I finished my book, have the same structure as declarative sentences or clauses. And imperative is a command. So like saying, go write your book. There is an implied subject, which is you go write your book. So those are 4 different types of clauses, but we are going to get even more into the nitty-gritty. Are you excited? It's gonna be so fun. Okay, are there any questions yet?
Nope, doesn't look like it.
Okay. These are 10 clause structures. And remember, a sentence is one independent clause, and then it can have more independent or dependent clauses with it. And there's different types, but these are the structures. So every clause will follow one of these structures. And we will go through examples of each and every one of them. But every single clause you've ever seen will follow one of these structures. Even as complex, like 100-word sentences will follow every clause within that sentence will follow one of these. So let's start with the first one. Noun phrase, and then a be verb, and then an adverb of time or place. That's what that stands for. So the noun phrase, there's a subject, and then the main verb is a be verb, and then there's an adjective, not an adjective, sorry, an adverb of time or place. So let's talk about those 4 different sentence structures that are really clause structures. The writer is upstairs. You can rephrase it as a question. Is the writer upstairs? It has the exact same structure. It's just you invert the subject and the verb. Or if there's a modal verb, you invert that instead. So then you have an exclamation, the writer upstairs. That tells you everything you need to know. Except it could have more than one meaning, but it tells you like the writer upstairs, tells you like the main information. And then go upstairs with the writer. That is the imperative, that is the command. And that the subject is changed to you because the subject of every imperative clause is you. And then the main verb is usually the very first word. And then you've got your adverb of time or place, upstairs in this case, and then a prepositional phrase with the writer. Another example of a sentence of this structure is all we have is now. So the subject is all we have, the main verb is a be verb, and now is the adverb of time. So be verbs are very interesting. They can function as main verbs, they can function as linking verbs or modal verbs, and they can also they can function as transitive or intransitive, which we will talk about. So we will see a lot of be verbs. But this structure is about time or place. Okay. Come on, here we go. This one, okay, so we've got the noun phrase and then a be verb and then an adjective. So the writer is diligent. That is the very simple structure. But you can
Okay, Talysa,
expand
to
it.
interrupt you.
Yeah.
Joan asked, can you explain modal verbs?
Okay, so those are what we call helping verbs. So like in English, our future tense has the word will in it. So I will help you with your project. I will go to the store. And so that would be a modal verb. It's a helping verb. So it's like could, would, might, may. It's something that goes before the main verb that takes on the tense. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay. If at any point I don't answer a question, feel free to tell me. And at the end, I will give you like a whole sheet full of information about that thing. So feel free to ask for more information. Okay. So this, we have a subject, the be verb, and the adjective, and we can expand it to longer sentences. So the son of the steward was angry at his father's harsh words. So the subject is the son of the steward. And then the be verb is was, past tense. And then the adjective is angry. And then at his father's words is a prepositional phrase. That's how it's functioning. And the main subject is son, and of the steward is a prepositional phrase within the subject noun phrase. Okay, so this sentence structure, it's lots of telling. It has its place in fiction, but it does a lot more telling than it does showing. Because instead of saying the son of the steward was angry at his father's words, we just show that he's angry, right? We show that he was hurt, or we show that he like stomped his feet or yelled back at his father, or whatever it is that you're gonna do, right? So be careful when using this sentence structure because you might be telling. There's always a place for it though. Like in Ready Player One, there's the quote, "Going outside is highly overrated." Of course you can show that, but this is like, it's a voice thing, right? That you need that structure. Does that make sense? So be careful with this one, but it has its place. And this is the last be verb one. This is the noun phrase. And then I put a one after it. That is a one, not an I, to show that this is the same. The other noun phrase is referring to the exact same subject. So later we will get into noun phrase 2 and noun phrase 3, but for now, this is just the same noun phrase. So the writer is a scholar. You've got that be verb, which is like an equal sign. The writer equals the scholar, right? And then you've got a question. Am I the one you're looking for? Which we rewrite to say you, oh, you are, I am. I am the one that you were looking for, that is implied within the structure. And then this is a quote from The Tempest. "We are such stuff as dreams are made on." We would be the subject, are is the main be verb, and then the noun phrase, such stuff as dreams are made on. That would be the secondary noun phrase, but since it's referring to the exact same thing, it's the same, it's a still noun phrase one. Does that make sense? Any questions?
Not right now, but Nathan wants you to send those sheets out. I think you should send them to everyone with these slides.
Okay. Let's move on to linking verbs. Linking verb, okay, so this we've got the subject and a linking verb and then an adjective. So this is different than the be verb adjective, because instead of saying the writer is worried, you say the writer seems worried. Instead of saying the new book is wonderful, the new book smells wonderful, right? Or the new books smell wonderful. It gives more deeper meaning because you have a somewhat stronger verb, but most linking verbs are actually weak verbs. So be careful with this one as well. again, it has its place. But it is lots of showing. What we want are the active verbs later that we'll talk about. But again, it has its place. So like stay true to yourself. That wouldn't make sense with just showing that. You have to state it outright. So like the subject is since this is an imperative clause, the subject is you, the linking verb is stay, and then the adjective is true. And then there's a prepositional phrase to yourself that is part of the verb phrase. So even though the word smell works as a linking verb when you're using an adjective afterwards, when you're using a noun phrase afterwards, it's not a linking verb. So saying he smells the book, that is actually a transitive verb because you're smelling an object. So that verb works. It can work as a linking verb and it can work as a transitive verb. So we've got another linking verb clause though, and that's the noun phrase, linking verb, noun phrase. This one is not very common because linking verbs, almost always you see them with adjectives afterwards. But the writer became a scholar or the tale remains a mystery. And if you can think of longer versions of this one, that would be great. We will go over tons of examples and see if we can find one. But this one you won't see a lot of. Feel free to use it. There's nothing wrong with it. As long as you're linking verb, you're using it as a strong verb and not just like, yeah. So linking verbs. Any questions about linking verbs? There are things like appeared, smelled, seems.
I don't know if I know what a weak verb and a strong verb are. Is there a quick explanation for that?
So a strong verb shows action, and weak verbs don't show it very well. There's no like, this is what a strong verb is and this is what a weak verb is. It's just that some verbs work harder than others. So like saying he stomped across the room, stomped is a stronger verb than walked because it's showing more than the walk is showing. Like you can
Okay.
say he walked, but stomped is stronger.
Yeah, I think that makes
And
sense.
so, yeah. So some linking verbs are like in this example, the writer seems worried. You can show that a lot easier. Or the new apprentice appeared weak. You can show that a lot easier than you can say he appeared weak. You can show how he appeared weak. You can, does that make sense? A lot of linking, okay, good. A lot of linking verbs are hedging language, which we use to distance ourselves. So when you're using clauses with linking verbs, you're creating more distance between yourself and the reader. So feel free to use them, but use them sparingly because you want to create that deep POV most of the time in your writing. So an intransitive verb. Intransitive means it does not have an object. Transitive means it does have an object. So we've got the writer rested. Simple subject, verb, that's all we have. The author's mental health deteriorated quickly during November. Because it's NaNoWriMo. So the subject is the health. The noun phrase is the author's mental health. The main verb, the intransitive verb is deteriorated. I can say that, I promise. Deteriorate. You can read it.
Deteriorated?
I can say it. It's just hard.
Also, Johnny has a question.
Okay, yeah.
He says linking verbs seem related to filter phrases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Johnny, do you want to expand on that question?
Well, and you called them hedging language. I love that phrase. I love that phrase. Could you go into a little more detail on that? On how it's something it's we fall into? Is it because it's, would you call that a weaker verb for a writer, or how would you, am I in the wrong ballpark?
So I have a whole presentation about like hedging language. So I will send you what I have on it, or at the very end, we can talk more about it. Because there's like hundreds of verbs that I flag as being hedging language that creates distance between you and the reader.
Love it.
And you can also call it like filter language. I've heard it called the same thing. So we can talk more about that at the end, or I can just give that information out if we don't have time. Does that make sense? Does that
Yes,
work?
thank you very much, Talysa. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Okay, we've got the man I met from the conference last month called. Does anyone see anything wrong with this? It is grammatically correct. You've got a noun phrase and then you have an intransitive verb. But what's the problem with that sentence?
Is it unclear who or what he called?
I guess it could be, yeah. Called. I'm talking about like calling on the phone. Like the man I met from the conference last month, he called me. He called me up. But does anyone see something that you would change about the sentence?
Except for its awkward phrasing, I'm not able to put my finger on it.
Yeah, it's awkward phrasing because you've got the main subject, the man, and the main verb called, and you've got all this distance between them. Typically, you want the main noun, the main subject of your noun phrase to be as close to the main verb as possible. So you can rephrase this any way you want, but you want it to be like the man called, or you want to like set it off with commas with a relative clause, like the man, comma, who I met at the conference last month, comma, called, so that you can tell immediately, you can skip over that phrase and your eyes will skip over phrases like that, and you'll immediately see the man called.
Every single word, every single sentence or clause in Latin is in this form. It does get old, but yeah. So if you read Latin, this makes perfect sense. So I'm down with that. But yeah.
This is just my caveat about this particular clause structure is be careful, because when you have an intransitive verb, you tend to hide it at the end a lot. And you don't want to do that because it creates distance between the subject and verb. And so it's awkward phrasing and it's confusing. It makes someone have to read it more than once or go back to the beginning of the sentence to find out what the subject was as soon as you get to the verb. This one's still pretty small. There's only, 7 words in between, but I've seen sentences that have 20 words in between the main subject and the main verb. So just be careful when using this clause structure to keep your verb close to your subject. Okay, so transitive verbs. These are verbs that take an object. And there's 4 different structures. So we will start with the noun phrase 1, transitive verb noun phrase 2. So that means that the object that it is taking is not the same object as the beginning, right? So the writer finished the book. Book is a different noun here. And finished, you can use finished as an intransitive verb. You can say someone finished, but here it's working as a transitive verb that needs an object. The writer finished what? You have to answer that question. So even though the deadline their editor gave them had long since passed, the author wrote the ending of the book. So what is the main subject?
The author.
Right.
Everything else is a prepositional phrase. Or not prepositional. What is it? Passive
It's a
perfect.
dependent clause.
That's it. Yeah.
So we have a clause. It has a subject and a verb. The deadline their editor gave them had long since passed. That is a dependent clause because we have the even though at the beginning. So even though the deadline the editor gave them had long since passed, the main subject is the author wrote the ending of their book. So wrote what, the noun phrase 2 is the ending, and then of their book is a prepositional phrase. But let's look at this clause, this dependent clause. Let's restructure it. So it's so that we can find the main noun and the main verb of this. So the deadline, their editor gave them. The editor gave them a deadline, right? So the editor is the main subject there. Gave is the main verb. And then there's two objects, them and the deadline. There's a direct object and an indirect object. So here, this noun phrase 2 is the direct object. This is what you are giving. So you are giving the deadline. You are writing the book. You are finishing the book. The indirect object is gave them, and we will see that here. So this, we've got the noun phrase 1, the transitive verb, noun phrase 2, and noun phrase 3. So 1 is the direct object, that's number 2, and the 1 is the indirect object, that's number 3. So that is who they're giving it to. Now, often you will see these inverted. You will see, like, in this order, we have the writer gave a thank you gift to their editor. And then the writer gave their editor a headache. So we have the writer and then gave their editor, which is actually noun phrase 3, a headache, noun phrase 2. Because what you are giving is the direct object, and who you are giving it to is the indirect. Now, the second sentence is kind of strange because we have the writer gave a thank you gift to their editor. When you invert it so that it's in order, you have to change it to a prepositional phrase. You don't say the writer gave a thank you gift to their editor. You have to change it to a prepositional phrase when you invert it. Let's see. However, the editor gave the writer some very useful feedback. Just another example. We've got the editor gave, and then the writer is the indirect, and then some very useful feedback, because that is what you are actually giving. You are giving the feedback. Does that make sense? Any questions so far?
Nope, we're good.
Okay. Let's see. Now it gets really fun. Noun phrase 1, transitive verb, noun phrase 2, and then adjective. This adjective is going to be modifying noun phrase 2. So the writer considered their editor intelligent. We've got the subject, the writer, the transitive verb considered, their editor, noun phrase 2, because you don't have two different objects, right? You've got considered their editor. You're actually considering the editor. That is the object, the direct object, even though it was the indirect object in the other clause. In this one, it's the direct object. And then we've got the adjective modifying it, intelligent. Then we've got, I believed him angry. And now I make the claim that this is not a strong sentence type in fiction, because again, this one's telling. So be careful with this clause. Again, it has its place, but a lot of the time it's telling. So we've got, I believed him angry. You can show that so much easier. You can say it when it's necessary, but you can show that. So just be careful with this one. Make sure you're not showing. I mean, make sure you're not telling, make sure you are showing. I can talk. Okay. I can word. This is great. A good example of this one. The rain makes the world softly blurred as if you can melt right into it. So we've got the subject, the rain. Transitive verb makes. What is it making? It's making the world softly blurred. That is the adjective. We've got the adverb and then adjective. And then this is a dependent clause, as if you can melt right into it. Take off the as if, and you've got, this would be a independent clause. You can melt right into it. Okay. This one is interesting. It is also not a strong sentence type in fiction. In fact, I only have one example. The writer considered their book a success. You've got the writer, which is the noun phrase. You've got considered their book, the direct object, a success. It's the same thing. So as we talked about earlier, when we've got two of the same noun phrase, those are synonymous. It's just like an equal sign between them. So the book is equal to a success is what they're saying. But we word it just a little bit differently, and it says he argued that the book was a bestseller. But we changed it. So this is no longer the same clause structure. He argued is the whole clause, right? It's the clause by itself. He argued. We've got the subject and the verb, and then the object, what he's arguing, is another clause. That the book was a bestseller. So that the book was a bestseller is a relative clause. And you've got the verb, the subject of the relative clause, the book, and the verb was, and then an object of the relative clause, bestseller. So even though it looks very similar, it is not. You have to be very careful with this one. You won't see a lot of it because a lot of the verbs that you use when you're equating two noun phrases together at the end, it's not a lot of strong verbs, right? Because you're using things like considered, seemed, more hedging language. So words that could also be used as linking verbs. Does that make sense? Okay, so those are the clauses. And so we talked about 4 different sentence structures, and then we talked about 4 different types of clauses, and then we talked about 10 different clause structures. So we have like 160 different possibilities so far, right? And that's before we get into expanding the sentences with prepositional phrases and relative clauses and fragments and modifiers, right? So let's talk about a few different rules of sentence structure before we move on to examples. So there's parallel construction. Whenever you have things in a list, you need to make sure they are parallel. So I should be running the world, taking down the patriarchy, and eating more chocolate. I could say I should be running the world, take down the patriarchy, and eat more chocolate, but then the structure would not be the same because I've got running the world, taking, and eating. You've got those 3 gerunds in a row, right? You want to make sure that when you have a list of any type, even if you're just saying 3 things together that you don't consider a list, you have to make sure they are the same structure. I fix this so much in manuscripts because people will say, or just put 2 independent clauses together, but they have different structures when they're talking, when it is in a list form and they're different structures.
What do you see? What do you see as the biggest drawback of breaking this rule? Is it because it separates it stylistically from the rest of the phrasing, from the rest of the sentence, or?
That is part of it, that it separates it stylistically. It separates it because it's like, I should be running the world, take down the patriarchy, and eat more chocolate. These are things that I should be doing, but this gives it slightly different meaning. So be running is different tense than take down. Be running is progressive, where take down is just, you've got be taking down is progressive, whereas I take down the patriarchy is just present tense. Yeah,
I can see it. It's actually a full-blown grammatical error, not just a style choice. Never mind. Continue. You're doing great.
So there are times when you'll see it when it's just simpler than a phrase that where it is stylistic. But yeah, then you'll have examples like this where if you change it, it's grammatically no longer the same throughout the sentence. Okay, so fragments. I love sentence fragments. A lot of editors hate them and change them in manuscripts. I don't. I love them because you're treating your reader with respect and intelligence. You are saying, I know that you understand what the rest of the sentence is. So some fragments work on their own, and some fragments you get the rest of the sentence from the context of the other sentences around it. And I will show you examples of that in our examples. But this is no matter what. this could be part of the sentence before. So it had to happen, comma, no matter what. And it would be adverbial about it had to happen. But there are other fragments that fragments that don't make any sense within context. And you can't parse out the rest of the sentence or the rest of the clause. Those are problematic and you have to be careful with those ones. But most fragments, you can parse out what the rest of the sentence is. So technically, this says it had to happen no matter what, because that is what this fragment is saying. Does that make sense? Okay, so modifiers. This is where we will learn about what a dangling modifier is. So running down the street, I dropped my hat. We've got running down the street does not have a subject. So it goes to the subject of the first independent clause that follows it. I dropped my hat. So what you will see a lot of and what people write a lot of and don't realize it is stuff like this one. Running down the street, my hat fell off. It's obvious from context that you're saying I was running down the street and my hat fell off. But what the sentence actually says is my hat was running down the street and then my hat fell off. So that is what a dangling modifier is. When the subject of this is the subject of the first independent clause that follows it, if it has a different subject. So the running down the street is supposed to be I, not my hat. Does that make sense?
I love that one. I
grammatic-
think I do that all the time.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So
Yeah.
that is what a dangling modifier is. It's when a modifier like this phrase, is modifying the wrong subject.
Yeah, understanding that is super useful. So thank you very much. That's cool.
You are welcome. We've got relative clauses. I'm sure you've heard restrictive versus non-restrictive. You don't need to know those terms. You don't need to be super versed with the jargon. Just know what a relative clause is and how to take it out of the sentence. That's all you need to know. So the book that she read yesterday is due at the library. The book is the main subject. The noun phrase is the book that she read yesterday. And then the main verb is, and then due at the library tomorrow is the rest of the verb phrase. The that she read yesterday is a relative clause. That one is non-restrictive. No, that one is restrictive. I've got this because it does not have commas. Non-restrictive does have commas. It's weird there. So restrictive does not have commas, and it means you can't take it out of the sentence and have the same meaning. So the book is due at the library tomorrow could be any book, but we're talking specifically about the book that she read yesterday. That one is due at the library tomorrow. Non-restrictive means that you can take it out and the book remains the same book that you're referring to, and it doesn't change the meaning. So the book, which she checked out from the library, is a bestseller. So we're not specifying which book is a bestseller. We're just saying that the book, which she happened to check out at the library, is a bestseller. Does that make sense about the difference? Okay. If you're unsure, check for what I just did is I put happened in it, which to me says like it just happened to be this, which to me means like that's extra information that we don't necessarily need. It just happened to be the one she checked out from the library. Whereas the books that she read yesterday, we're talking specifically about that book, and we can't take that out of the sentence. So the book is a bestseller is the main clause. The only time this, you will see that restrictive uses that and non-restrictive uses which. That's just something that editors will change for you most of the time. You have to be careful with the commas, usually when you're talking about people. So I want to thank my mother, Pam, for everything she has done for me. This means my mother, Pam, without the commas means I have more than one mother, which is a possibility. There are people who have more than one mother, but this is specifying my mother, Pam. If there were commas around it, if it said, I want to thank my mother, comma, Pam, for everything she has done for me, you're saying my mother, who happens to be Pam, is the one I'm thanking for everything she has, for everything she has done, right? Does that make sense? If I put commas around her, there's only one of her. If there's no commas, I have more than one mother, and Pam's the one I'm specifying. So
Don't you mean that the other way around? That if there's no commas, it's just Pam? And if there are commas, there could be Pam and Dolores and Jill?
no.
No. So in the way the sentence reads now, I want to thank my mother, Pam. She has several mothers?
Yeah.
Oh,
Multiple mothers, because you're specifying my mother, Pam, and that's restrictive. It has to be in the sentence.
I
If
see.
there were commas around it, you can take it out.
All right. So this is from your FLDS story. Sorry.
Funny, Johnny, funny.
Doing my best. Yeah.
Uh,
All right. I see now.
So a reduced clause is the sentence actually has a full relative clause in it, but it doesn't, structurally, the relative clause is there, but you don't see the beginning of the relative clause in the sentence, surface level. So our researchers exploring the same topic have found similar results. Main subject, other researchers, main verb, have found, we've got the modal right there, and then the object, similar results. This is a relative clause. Other researchers who are exploring the same topic. So the subject would be who, and then the main verb is are exploring. We don't need the who are in the surface level sentence. So if you are diagramming it or parsing it out, you would say other researchers who are exploring the same topic as a relative clause have found similar results, but you can just take out the who are and the sentence still makes sense. Same with I reviewed many books addressing the topic of grammar. So this would be I reviewed many books that addressed the topic of grammar. And instead of saying that addressed, you can just change it to addressing. You can take out the that, which is a good thing. If you can take out the that, take out the that. If you can't, you leave it in. I reviewed many books that address the topic of grammar becomes addressing. That is a reduced clause. Okay. And most of that information is so that you can see what we already talked about, those 10 clause structures. You want to be able to pick them out. And all of this stuff can get in the way if you don't know what it is. So relative clauses, you need to be able to say, okay, that is not the main subject, that is not the main verb, that, okay. Here are some examples. These are the same sentences we used earlier. Go upstairs and I will be there shortly. The first clause, well, first, okay, what is this? Is this simple, compound, complex, or compound complex?
Simple imperative, right? With a supporting clause.
This is a compound sentence. So the first clause is an imperative, you're right. And the second clause is a declarative. So go upstairs, the first subject is you. You go upstairs and I will be up there shortly. So there's two independent clauses that you can say. You go upstairs, I will be up there shortly, makes perfect sense with a period in between them. So that's compound. But you can see that there's different types of clauses. One's imperative, one's declarative. One could have been exclamatory, one could have been a question. Go upstairs.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Sorry, can I ask just a question? It's probably off topic here, but in this situation, could you use a semicolon as well? And when is a semicolon and you get rid of, the and? When is that? Does that play into this? And does that make sense? And how do I know when I can and can't?
Okay, so semicolons function the same as a period. So they have to separate independent clauses. So here you can put a semicolon and take out the and. Go upstairs, semicolon, I will be up there shortly. That makes perfect sense. That is grammatical. And that is punctuated correctly. The only difference between a semicolon and a period is that you want those two independent clauses to be more closely related. So,
yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And
Like,
one's not
that's-
more right than another or preferred in fiction or anything like that. It is just an option of the author based on if he wants that tied closer together, or he or she wants that together.
Yes.
Okay.
99% of the time, you need a period. But every once in a while, you come across two independent clauses that are so closely related, you don't want them separated out by sentence. But they're separate clauses for sure, but you want them in the same grammatical sentence. So you put a semicolon between them. Does that make sense?
Thanks.
Okay, these are the examples we did earlier. The first one is simple. It's just one independent clause. The second one is compound. We've got two independent clauses. Then we've got complex. We've got a dependent clause and then an independent clause. And then we've got compound complex. That means there's a dependent clause and then two independent clauses. We could piece out the, let's see. I'm running out of time here, aren't I? Let's go on to the examples. So this, I'm sure you guys have seen, it's an online meme. But it works not just for sentence length, but for clause type. So if you have a section of your manuscript and it has the same structure over and over and over again, it gets monotonous. And it becomes boring. It drones, it's stuck. When you have different sentence structures, it becomes more musical. It sings, and it's really more interesting when you have different lengths and different structures. So I will show you an example of what not to do in my manuscript. Oh, not yet. First, we're going to go to Tolkien because he's amazing. The mind that thought of light, heavy, gray, yellow, still, swift, also conceived of magic that would make heavy things light and able to fly, turn gray lead into yellow gold, and the still rock into a swift river, swift water. What is the main subject?
The mind?
The mind.
Okay, able to fly.
And then what's the main verb?
Thought.
Conceived.
Conceived. That thought of light, heavy, gray, yellow, still, swift. That's a relative clause. So you got to be careful. The mind that thought, when you have a relative clause like this, you're using the same subject. However, that shows you that this is a relative clause coming up. So you can take it, you can remove it, and you still have the main verb to come. So the mind conceived of magic that would make heavy things light and able to fly. That turned gray lead into yellow gold and the still rock into a swift water. So we've got a list here, and it's in another relative clause. The main clause here is the mind conceived of magic. The mind that thought of this is the one that conceived of magic. And what kind of magic is it? It's the kind of magic that would do these three things: make heavy things light and able to fly, turn gray lead into yellow gold, and the still rock into a swift river, swift water. I keep saying that. So that is the main clause that we parsed out is the mind conceived of magic. What clause structure is that? We've got a noun phrase, then what kind of verb is it?
Is that transitory? Oh.
Well, it's conceiving of something, so it would be going to be transitive verb, right? Conceiving of
Yes.
something. Yeah.
This is not, some people will say that this says conceived and it's an intransitive verb, and then of magic is a prepositional phrase working adverbally. I like to think of this as conceived of is a phrasal verb. So like you turn off the light, you turn up the music, kind of, you have to have the preposition as part of the verb. So conceived of magic, and that is the direct object there. So does that make sense?
Outstanding.
Okay. I've got some examples here, but first I want to show you what not to do. Let me find this one. This one is what not to do. Yay, this is my manuscript. It has the same structure over and over and over and over again. This is my first paragraph. And I was going through it and I'm like, oh, I need to find examples of different structures. And I looked at my first paragraph. I'm like, these are all the same. Drew flipped the oak sign in the bakery window from open to closed and went back inside for tea. Tegan wanted to play toffle chess with her later, and she didn't want to beat him too quickly. She could feel the tea's poison through her veins, and she felt herself numbing. Her thoughts were foggy, and she was dizzy enough to sit down. Enough to need to sit. She never really enjoyed the poisonous Silencia tea leaves, but they were necessary. It was the only thing that could dull her gift, and it wouldn't kill her in small quantities. I've got compound sentence after compound sentence after compound sentence, and you can feel it kind of get old. What I need to do here is change some of these to like more complex sentences and others to much shorter sentences that are simple. Her thoughts were foggy. She was dizzy enough to need to sit. Like I can break it up so I don't have the same structure after the same structure after the same structure. Does that make sense? This is something that you don't do in your manuscript until you are much further down the road. This is not something you worry about when you are first writing it, but it is something that you want to be aware of because this is something that your editors will see. And they'll be like, oh, this writing's a little stagnant. They may not be able to tell you why, but they'll tell you that it's stagnant and you won't understand why until someone comes along and tells you, oh, that's because you got the same structure over and over and over again. You need to change it up to make it more musical, to make it flow better. Does that make sense?
That's awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Here we've got just some basic sentences. We can, let's find the main verb and main noun verb and figure out what clause it is. So the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. That was donated by Tara Left. I almost said Taylor Swift, and that's not the same thing. The man in black fled across the desert. So what is the main subject? The man in black. So this is part of the noun phrase, the man in black. But in black is a prepositional phrase describing the man. The main verb is fled. The whole verb phrase is fled across the desert. So fled is the main verb. Across the desert is another prepositional phrase. So here we've got the man fled, which means that this is intransitive. You're not fleeing something. If it had said the man fled the mansion, then you're fleeing something and that verb is transitive. But this is just the man fled. And where he fled is across the desert. And so we've got the gunslinger followed. So that's another independent clause. That means the sentence is compound. The gunslinger followed. Notice they put it as part of the same sentence and didn't break it up. It could have been more dramatic. Maybe it's not what was needed in the time. Oh, sorry. But we turned it into a compound sentence and the gunslinger followed. The next one is a question. In what world do men and women pay the same price for passion? What is the subject?
Would it be passion in this case?
Mm-mm.
No.
Men and women?
Yeah, men and women. We've got a compound subject there. It doesn't mean the clause is compound, it means just the subject. It's got men and women. We've got, they hold equal weight as part of the subject. So in what world, that's a prepositional phrase. Men and women do pay. When you're doing a question, you flip around the subject and the modal verb, remember? So we've got do is the modal verb for pay. So men and women do pay the same price for passion in what world? That is the sentence. So do pay is the main verb, and then the same price is the direct object. For passion is just another prepositional phrase. And then in what world is a prepositional phrase for the whole sentence. So the sentence there is men and women do pay the same price for passion in what world? It's asking what world. Anytime you have what or who or where, you can answer it with the same word, but you replace the W with a T. So in that world, if you've got who, you go with whom and you replace it with a T, you've got them. And if you're asking where, you replace it with a T, you've got there, like you're answering the question. So if it's confusing you, got a question, just replace the WH, the question word, with the noun that correlates to it, and you can answer the question. Men and women pay the same price for passion in that world. Or really, what it's asking is what the pragmatic meaning of the sentence is, that men and women never pay the same price for passion in any world, right? So semantically and pragmatically, they have different meanings. Does that make sense? Awesome. Am I out of time? Is that what the ding is?
No, that's people in and out.
We are getting
Okay.
close though.
Okay.
It's 8:23.
Okay. Let's do this one down here from the Way of Kings. The purpose of a storyteller is not to tell you how to think, but to give you questions to think upon. What is the subject?
Storyteller?
Mm-mm. Of a storyteller is a prepositional phrase. You've got the preposition before it.
It's you.
It's the purpose.
Purpose.
Purpose? Okay.
The purpose of a storyteller is, that is the main verb. And then you've got is this, is not this, but this. So we've got subject, verb, and then not to tell you how to think, but to give you questions to think upon. So we've got, it's the same as saying like, the cup is not blue, but it is green. That's the same structure. The cup is blue, is not blue, but green. Does that make sense? Okay. Here are more examples. I will give you guys this presentation. If you drop your email, just email me if you want to copy the presentation, and we can go through any of these another time. I'm running out of time. So these are just more examples. I love this quote from J.R.R. Tolkien about Sam, but we probably don't have time to go over all of them. These are more examples from my manuscript of what not to do. And then just a reminder of what the 10 clause structures are. Use them differently, use them with questions, use them as exclamations, invert subjects and verbs to make it more interesting, add prepositional phrases, add adverbs. Don't add adverbs before the verb, because that just means you have a weak verb. Add adverbs throughout the rest of the sentence. And you can make all of these so interesting and complex. But yeah, every clause will fall into one of these 10 categories. And every sentence will be simple, compound, complex, or complex. And yeah, so that sums it up.
Woo!
Any other questions?
You don't have
What
any
is your
chat.
email?
There it is.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
what
will.
is your email?
That is at the very beginning. Let me just, there it is.
Yay.
That is my email. If you want a copy of this, let me know. If you have questions, please let me know. I have more material. So if you have a question about anything in this presentation, I probably have a lot of material for it to answer your question. So don't be afraid. just tell me what you are struggling with, what you want to know more about, and I can send it to you. Johnny, I'll send you what I have on hedging language.
Yeah, a lot of us wanted
I'll send you
the,
an email to remind you. That is so kind. Thank you.
There's actually a number of people that are wondering about the hedging verbs.
Yeah, I think that is a big one. I love that.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, if you email me, I'll send you this and I'll send you what I have on hedging language. And yeah, that is, I hope you guys learned something. I hope it wasn't like just boring Talysa talking about sentences.
It's
whole
very
time.
good.
I feel like we were like explaining the circuitry in a computer class. It's good to get down into this. So much of this stuff we do in